Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the show. Today's episode it's better than Netflix. I'm not gonna lie. We are talking today to Josh Macin, and I got introduced to Josh through a mutual friend of mine, and I checked out his website and his YouTube channel, and I really felt deep down that his story needed to be shared, and I wanted to just help him get his message out to a broader audience. Today, Josh is gonna share with us how he went from being a professional athlete, competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, winning world championships, to suddenly falling into a state of extreme physical pain and suicidal thoughts. And this all happened in the span of just 2 weeks. After trying all the traditional psychotherapies and drugs, he decided to go a different route. And with extreme physical pain and inflammation in his whole body, he traveled deep into the Amazon to explore other realms via plant medicines. And he was basically hoping for a miracle cure. And that's just the beginning. So he's really going to share his story from his heart with us today. And again, I'm telling you, you're going to be at the edge of your chair listening to this. Before we jump into this incredible episode with him, I just wanted to remind you of how you can support the show. I know I do it every week, but I'll make it quick. The number one way you can show your support is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. And if you do leave a rating or review in this period, what I want you to do is just screenshot your review. So just take a screenshot with your phone, email it to my team, info@brettlarkin.com. And as a thank you for leaving a review, we'll respond with a really beautiful PDF booklet full of my favorite affirmations and journaling prompts. It's just a free gift as a thank you from me to you. So just screenshot your review and email it over to me so we can get you that. And then the second way you can show your support is through making a purchase at SavannahSpirit.com. Without Savannah Spirit, this podcast would not exist. So they have just incredible yoga clothing, jewelry, and especially today, I really want to highlight their collection of healing energy crystals, since today we're really diving into a story of healing through atypical means. It's a crazy story. I'm just gonna let us get right into it. Josh, thank you so much for being here and coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett.
I feel like I'm very lucky because I get to talk to so many people on the show who have incredible stories of either spiritual growth or transformation. But with you, oh my gosh, I was like looking at your website and I feel like you have a really big story to tell around your health, both like physically and mentally. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start back when I was 23 years old. How about that?
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, before I got sick, I was actually a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion and Pan American champion. I was traveling all around the world competing in that sport. I was working at all different kinds of cool corporations, making good money, living in the Lower East Side, and literally that's Manhattan, by the way, Lower East Side. Literally in a 2-week period of time, I went from being that dude who I thought I was, to basically experiencing full day panic attacks, anxiety, depression. It was as if my mind had completely broken and cracked in a matter of 2 weeks, right? So it was no slow, gradual process. In hindsight, there were some months of feeling fatigued before it came to a head, but really I had no reference point. It was like all of a sudden I was this guy, and then all of a sudden a couple weeks later I was this totally different mess of a human being and in my mind I thought I was just going crazy. Right? I had no reference point and no one to help me understand what was happening. And again, it was just suicidal depression, my panic attacks, my brain split off. I started experiencing like multiple different voices and imagine being at a concert and all the people are talking and music is going and all of these things are happening around you. I literally felt like I was in a concert in my head at all times, no matter what. And so, the first step when that happened was I had to turn to my parents for help. I had to turn to the psychiatric system. And the first step was to start taking these antidepressants and bipolar medications and all of these different things that I got diagnosed with in a matter of 1 hour. I was 1 hour in this office, and all of a sudden I left with all of these diagnoses and put basically a lifelong prison sentence. And so after about 4 months of dealing with this, and I guess I don't really know how to put it in more detail about what I was going through. It was basically like I was tripping on acid. Another analogy. Imagine tripping on some sort of drug 24/7 without taking a drug. It's just like the carpet is ripped from underneath you. It's a bad trip, and you'd have no resting point of your consciousness to rest on. It's just like lost, totally lost.
It sounds totally terrifying, especially with the onset happening so quickly. Like within 2 weeks, you were just like, it was like your brain fell apart.
Exactly. And I had no coping mechanisms because it was such a quick process. I had no way to cope with it. I had no, again, reference point. Imagine going through this for a couple of years, you would at least learn how to manage it. In the beginning, it was just chaos, like a grenade had gone off basically. And so anyway, I eventually, after about 4 months of taking these pills, I realized that they weren't the route for me. And something deep inside came online, and just the thoughts I would go through were, I feel like nobody who I'm talking to truly understands what I'm going through. I feel like they truly don't understand mental illness. It's infinitely more complex than these neurotransmitters and chemicals and needing to be adjusted with pills. If I'm wrong, I'm willing to die or go crazy testing this hypothesis of mine. The hypothesis was that there was another route available. There was something deeper happening to me than just the word depression, just the word panic or anxiety or bipolar or whatever the labels may be. I took it upon myself. I flushed all these pills down the toilet, and not a good recommendation for anyone, by the way, because I went through a massive, massive withdrawal for about 6 or 7 days. And I said, screw it. I'm going to the Amazon jungle and I'm going to drink ayahuasca. And ayahuasca.
I'm sure your parents were like, this is a great idea.
Absolutely horrified. Yeah, horrified. And that wasn't a pretty time. So basically, I was at a corporate job actually at the time. With the 4.5 months of taking the antidepressants, I actually was just stable enough to work some sort of job, and I ended up working there for like 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I quit, and I flew to the Amazon jungle in May of 2014. Yeah, in the Amazon jungle, I had one ayahuasca ceremony. The first time I went to the Amazon, I had one ayahuasca ceremony, had a terrible, terrible experience. It was just more of the same, magnified exactly what I was dealing with times 10. Flew home and went to literally the hospital. I literally checked myself into the mental hospital because I was in such bad shape. Again, it wasn't the ayahuasca that did it. It was what I was dealing with being magnified by the ayahuasca.
And tell listeners what ayahuasca is, just in case they don't know.
Yes, ayahuasca is a hallucinogenic medicine that's getting a lot of traction in the natural health community. It's basically a vine and a plant, the chacruna plant and the kapi vine, 2 random plants in the Amazon that are brewed together for 24 to 72 hours. And it's drunk in a ceremony at night, particularly, and it basically floods the body with DMT, which creates hallucinations, auditory, visual hallucinations, connects you to divine, connects you to something greater than your normal waking consciousness. And it also has a very intense purgative effect. So it makes you poop, throw up, yawn, sweat, and the premise is that we're basically highly toxic with emotions and energy and actual physical toxins. And this ayahuasca helps clean the body and the spirit. And a lot of people have gotten massive, massive healing therapeutic benefit from it, which is what I was reading about at the time. I was Googling all natural remedies for depression, and ayahuasca was one of the main things that kept coming up. Now it's quite terrifying because it reveals to you your inner shadows, your inner corners of your being that most of us run away from or keep in the closet.
Right. It magnifies the darkness, right? So I can only imagine, like, if you're already in such a dark time, how intense that experience would be.
It was excruciating. Yeah, it was excruciating. I didn't process that at the time. It's funny you can just say that, knowing that as a fact, but at the time it didn't even occur to me that was a possibility. I was like, I'm going to get a reset and I'm just going to leave the jungle after 2 weeks and be a totally enlightened being, That was my theory. Yeah.
So you're back in New York, and this experience seems like it sort of failed you for the purposes you were hoping it would help with. What happens next?
So after the next day I woke up in the mental hospital, the first day I woke up, I said, I'm returning to the Amazon. I'm going back to the Amazon. I'm going to build up my strength and I'm going to clean my body. I'm going to build up strength. I'm going to build up a stable consciousness through meditation and yoga and fasting. And I'm returning to the Amazon. And I vowed in that hospital that I was going to return to the Amazon. And in the hospital, I called my friend and I said, get us some mushrooms. I want to try mushrooms. So, basically my theory was I needed to do smaller things to work my way up to going back to the Amazon. So I did some ketamine injections, which is legal in New York City for people who are suicidally depressed. I did a couple of those. They were mild benefit, but nothing of substance. I did a bunch of mushroom experiences. Every time I would do mushrooms, I would just have terrible experiences, just more pain, more torment, more fear and panic attacks, and changed my diet. I started eating cleaner. I started through that one ayahuasca experience. I learned how important it is that the food that we put in our bodies is exactly what we get out of our life. And so I spent months, maybe 6, 7, 8 months working on myself, doing yoga, doing some fasting. And eventually I said, you know what? I am still in awful shape, like literally suicidal, literally panic attacks all day. Not all day. Most days I would have panic attacks, anxiety 24/7. But I said, I feel strong enough, like I'm ready to just dive into this problem. Even though I was doing horrible, I was just floating above it, had just enough space from it to be able to get myself to do things for myself, to be able to buy a flight, to be able to even orchestrate another trip to the Amazon. And it was really just my spirit was inside of me, allowing me to keep on going. And I went to the Amazon another time. And I actually went with my ex-girlfriend at the time, who was working at one of the largest ayahuasca centers in the world. And so, yeah, I met a woman, basically, in that awful situation. I had met a woman right before going to the Amazon a second time. And it just so happened that she worked at one of the largest Amazon jungle retreats for ayahuasca. So many synchronicities. Really, it was a lot of she was there as like a helper. It was a pretty unhealthy relationship in a sense that I was in such bad shape. The grounds for a healthy relationship just were not there. But in any case, I lived in the Amazon for about 5.5 months. The second time around, I did 21 more ayahuasca ceremonies. I did more fasting, more juicing, meditation. My days were fully occupied by spiritual work, witnessing my thoughts, trying to love myself, walking meditations, sitting meditations, anything that I can do to stay afloat. It was necessary to do hours a day of work in order to stay afloat. And I still was not at the root of my issues. Even after the 5.5 months, I spent a couple months in the mountains. I worked with San Pedro, another hallucinogenic medicine. Still miserable, still like insane mental chatter, anxiety, panic. At this point in time, my digestive system just started shutting down on me. So much stress, so much anxiety, the digestive system just stopped working. And I began to lose a lot of weight. Broke up with that woman after those 6 months in the jungle. Again, embarked on another journey at home, just saving up money, trying to figure out what the next step was. I was a caddy at a country club, and I would just walk, miles a day with golf bags on my shoulders. At that point in time, I just couldn't even fathom working in a company anymore. After how deep I had gone into the spiritual journey, I just couldn't be around people who were in that way of life. And I was, again, doing more full-time work at home in New Jersey, fasting for 10, 12 days at a time while caddying. Very, very difficult adventure. More hallucinogenic experiences and float tanks, all kinds of different detox methods. And still just like, I'm about to give up. This is just, I guess I'm just a bad apple. I guess I'm just is really what went through my mind. Eventually, I returned to the Amazon a third time to do a dieta, an isolation dieta. And a dieta is an apprenticeship with a shaman. because the only thing that I can resonate with in all of my books, I read hundreds of books about depression and mental illness. The only thing I could resonate with was something called a shamanic initiation, which is when shamans of other time periods and other cultures, they would get amazingly sick. They would get crippled with voices and depression, and they couldn't get off the beds. And then the whole community would come together and chant for this individual and help them transcend the process, because the community knew that this sickness meant good news from the other side. It meant this individual has a medicine for the planet. We need to help him go through it. And that they would then become the shaman or the healer of the village. And in our culture, we lock people up in asylums who are going through anything that's outside of the ordinary box of mental illness. So anyhow, this shamanic initiation kept resonating with me. The shamans kept talking to me about the fact that they said, "Tu tienes grande medicina, pero tu tienes grande problema." And that meant you have a big problem, but you have a big medicine. And they kept telling me that. They just kept saying, look, we're trying our best. You have something big going on. We're really not sure. We're not sure. It's big, And the shamans I trusted my life with the shamans, because for whatever reason, looking at them in the eyes, I would feel that they knew what I was going through, and they have this multi-generational wisdom in their eyes, unlike anything we see in common Western culture. It's just such a deep divine wisdom in their eyes. And I didn't see that amongst any of my other friends or mentors or people who were trying to help me. I just couldn't grab that from them. And these shamans, I could. So I did an isolation dieta with a tree called Huayra-Caspi. And this is where you drink the sap of a certain tree or plant in conjunction with ayahuasca. And this tree or plant comes to life and teaches you lessons. And you're also on your way to becoming a healer in that regard. And I was supposed to be 90 days isolated, no human contact, in the Amazon in Cantamana, Peru. And I lasted about 28 days before tapping out. It was the most excruciating experience of my life. You can check out more details about it on my website or my YouTube videos, but absolutely excruciating to not have human contact and to be drinking ayahuasca 3 times a week, to be isolated, to be taking this dieta, which was super, super strong. And anyway, I had to quit, and because I said, I'm going to die here in this jungle. I was 150 pounds, normally walking around 180. And my digestive system didn't work. Everything fermented. I wasn't receiving any nutrients. I was panicking all day. And I said, okay, I'm literally going to have to die in order to get to the end of this dieta. I have to find something else. I flew home, was at my wit's end, my absolute wit's end, just totally devastated. No money, no nothing, hardly any spirit left. And I booked, and we're coming to the end of my abbreviated story here, but I booked what I vowed to myself throughout this journey. I promised myself that if I was ever truly at that end point where I thought I was going to do something stupid, promised myself that I would go do Iboga. And Iboga is another hallucinogenic drug. It lasts 24 to 36 hours. It's in Gabon, Africa, and a lot of heroin addicts have had success coming off of heroin. A lot of people with broken brains and broken bodies, they get this divine download, this reset, if you will. I just felt like I don't know what else to do. I tried everything, and there's hundreds of things that I'm not mentioning. Therapies and cognitive behavioral therapy. I can go on. The list I'd have to actually sit and think about how many different things I did. But so this Iboga, I opened up a credit card, and at the last stages of what I thought would be the end of my life, I said, screw it. Money is pixels on a computer screen. Means nothing to me. My credit is perfect, but I don't need perfect credit if I'm dead. So I'll max out. Took out, $20,000, $25,000, paid the shaman $4,000, bought my flight to Africa, didn't tell a soul. I think I told my best friend a couple days before leaving in quotes, because I didn't actually go. And a couple days before getting on that plane, which was my last ditch effort at life. And might I add that my plan was that I would fast in the woods of Africa, in the forest. If I didn't receive benefit from this plant, I would go into the woods with no water, no food, and just get lost in the jungle until I passed on to the next world. That was my plan. And it was 100% planned. Nothing was going to get in my way. All of a sudden, I'm 2 days away from getting on that plane to Africa, and I start thinking about mercury. mercury, mercury, mercury keeps coming to me. I'm thinking about my mercury fillings in my teeth. I'm just constantly thinking about anything that could be wrong in my body, any surgeries, anything that is maybe inside of me. I was just like, this level of pain is so astronomical. Maybe I have something going on that in some crazy way. Maybe there's some organ that has some metal stuck in it, or maybe that surgery on my chin when I got stitches, maybe they've left something in there. My mind was going everywhere. I decided, you know what? I'm going to get these mercury fillings out before I go to Africa, because money doesn't mean anything, and maybe mercury fillings are bad for us, because I had read some articles about that in historically before I got to this point. So I took my fillings out. I got home. I Googled mercury poisoning stories. Never done that before. I read a story by a woman named Connie Fox. That story single-handedly saved my life. I mean, saving my life was a long, process of detox, but that story was enough to prevent me from going to Africa, because it was the only story I'd ever read that was like, holy shit, this person dealt with what I'm dealing with. And I basically canceled that trip. I broke down in my basement and I screamed for my mom, and my mom came down, the nervous wreck that she was. My whole family was on edge that I would take my own life, even though I always said, no, I'm good. Deep down, they knew that something was just terribly, terribly wrong. And my mom came down and I said, call dad right now. We called my father on speakerphone, and I said, you were about to lose your son. I was about to go to Africa to take Iboga, but I can't. I said, I found the fucking problem. And at this point in time, I had said that multiple times. I found the problem. I'm going to the jungle, But you still there with me, Brett?
No, I am. I'm at the edge of my seat. I'm listening.
Okay. I was. I had my dad and my mom on the phone, and I said, you almost lost your son. I was about to go to Africa, but I can't go to Africa. And at this point in time, they had heard me say things of hope maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 times already. And they had lost hope, and they had lost faith in my word. My word no longer carried any weight. And that's a very, very difficult place to be in when you're already depressed, to have no fucking weight in your voice. None of my friends cared. No one wanted to hear my story anymore. My best friend, Eden Lambert, he was the only one who stuck by my side the whole time. But anyhow, I said, I have mercury poisoning. They're like, what are you talking about? I was like, I have mercury poisoning. I just know it. And my father promised me at that time. He said, okay, Josh, I don't know what this is about. I don't know what it means. I want to do research, but just know that don't go to Africa. We're here to support you. And that was a crucial turning point for me, because I never had support from my family, because I was always doing the weird thing, like ayahuasca, like fasting, like all of the stuff that was labeled weird. I had no financial support and basically hardly any moral support. But from this point forward, my family came onto my side, and they said, he's not good. They knew I wasn't going to go back on pills. They knew it. They knew I'd rather die than go back on pills. So they just said, okay, this is our only hope. Father paid for everything. I went through a very intense mercury detox protocol for around the 4-month mark is when I started waking up with joy, with love, with peace in my being. Around the 8-month mark is when I literally was experiencing a resurrection, like waking up with these tears of, oh my God, where have I been all of these years? What happened to me? And sure enough, maybe a year into my detox protocol is when I started to feel more stable than most people around me. And now it's 2.5 years later. And I'm solid. I'm super, super stable. I love my life. I help people all around the world detox from heavy metals and parasite toxicity. I also released hundreds and hundreds of parasitic worms throughout this process, because they were eating me from the inside out with how bad shape I was in. And now travel around the world. I have a YouTube channel, and I love my fucking life. I love it. And yeah, that's my long story short.
So Josh, were you ever tested for mercury poisoning, like before in the whole process? And what came out of that?
Yeah, I got tested at, what was the date? Maybe February of 2000, right a couple weeks after that moment that I told you about in the basement. And my mercury levels were astronomical, which, by the way, this was divine, because many people who are toxic do not receive levels of mercury in their hair the way I did, because their body isn't even strong enough to release the mercury to the hair. Body isn't even chelating. All of the mercury is stuck in the organs, and hair tests only show us what's in our actual hair follicles. So I had a off the charts mercury. It was a 0.5 on the Analytical Research Labs test, which was literally off the charts. And the reason that was so important for me to see is because I wouldn't have believed all of this mercury stuff had I not seen those tests.
And it's so crazy that those tests were never performed right when you initially started feeling these symptoms on your first trip or so to the doctor, right? I mean, that's what I'm thinking anyway.
Oh my God. See, now for whatever reason, now once you're imbued in the culture of wellness and detox and yoga or whatever, all of these things, it's like heavy metals are a big deal. For whatever reason, it never crossed my mind. It never existed in my field as an actual issue. I couldn't believe it. I was so of the impression that spirit versus like spirit over physical. I could never believe that something physical could take my willpower away or could make me sick. This is the paradigm I was coming from. Yeah, and honestly, I think I probably heard of mercury and mercury poisoning twice in my whole life up until that point. And it was a quick little story about someone who ate a thermometer and none of that stuff resonated in my field. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And listeners, just so you know, like we're going to come back with Josh on Thursday. And, his story so much now is really about telling people that heavy metal toxicity and parasites can be responsible for a lot of what people feel these days: loneliness, depression, violence, all these things. So, I mean, I am very eager to hear, what causes this heavy metal toxicity and parasites to come into our system, to come into our bloodstream, and how you think this happened for you. So we're gonna pick up there on Thursday. Savannah listeners, I hope you were sitting at the edge of your seat this whole story like I was. It was just so fascinating, and I have a lot more questions for Josh. So make sure to tune in to Thursday's episode. As always, make sure leave a rating or review, support the show here on iTunes, and we will tune in with you guys all again on Thursday. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.